Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel, and I've got a quick question for you. Have you ever heard of the everything code? It's a macro thesis created by Raoul Pal and Julian Biddle, and it's a macro explanation of everything that is driving, well, everything. Debt, markets, you name it. And the thesis explains in great detail why the entire crypto asset class, including XRP, will keep rising dramatically. And Julian Biddle, just the other day, he wrote a post explaining this in great detail. And it's clear that one of the things that compelled him to do so, to write this lengthy post, it was just the fact that investors in the crypto space are terrified out of their ever-loving minds right now. That is very apparent. But Julian, frankly, he's one of the most informed and data-driven people in the entire crypto space. Very intelligent guy, very savvy, and he well understands that you do not need to be feeling the fear and angst that you've been feeling over crypto markets tumbling recently. He knows that. He knows that all of this, it just doesn't matter. And it's more than a gut feeling, just to be clear. It's backed by hard data. Indisputable fact, I'd go so far to say. And if you hang out with me for the duration of this video, then by the end, you'll know what he knows, and frankly, you're going to feel at peace as a participant in the market. Because, you'll know that it doesn't matter if crypto prices fall further from here, which is possible. They could fall a little bit, or I don't know. Well, it's certainly possible, but we're still unquestionably going to rocket way, way, way to the upside as time passes. And also understand that what I'm about to share with you, almost no one invested in the crypto space is aware of. Almost nobody knows what I'm about to share with you. This is very uncommon knowledge. Uncommon knowledge. And you need to know what I'm about to share with you. And certainly, just to be clear, no offense to Julian Biddle whatsoever. I'm a huge fan. But I think most people that read his post will probably have a ton of questions about what the things that he's saying actually mean. I don't think that everything he wrote is the most intuitive to understand. So I'm going to break it down. I'm going to break it down in simple to comprehend terms. It's this thing that I do. And look, I know, just to be clear, I know a lot of times many of you won't listen to like literally 100% of a video that I publish when you click on it, which is perfectly fine. Just listen to whatever amount that you want. But in this case, just want to say, fair warning here. This particular video, this is not a video that you can listen to, 50% of the way through or 75% of the way through and walk away with anything even close to resembling a useful understanding of the subject matter. It's going to take me to the very end of the video to tie everything together, and you won't know what you're missing if you do stop. So just a friendly heads up, for this video specifically, it is in your best interest to carve out just a small little corner of your day to listen to the entire thing. And I'll only ever say that in videos where that is the case. And this is one such video where, you really got to listen to the end if you really want to understand the actual data. But if you do, you're going to be light years ahead of the competition. And if you can just learn this and remember this, you're not going to be fearful about, chaos and tumult in the markets in the future. You just won't if you really let the logic and the data just sink in here. And so this is the post. So here's the way that I'm going to structure this video. I'm going to read this entire post. I'm going to read it verbatim, and as I go through this, I'm assuming that as I'm going through this, you're probably going to have a bunch of questions into your mind as I'm reading, and be like, well, what's that mean? And what's that mean? And what's that mean? So I'm going to run through this thing, and then I'm going to break this down in great detail, certainly in particular the core components, because you've got to understand the fundamental concept that he's getting at. But I don't know that most people have enough of a fundamental understanding of the subject matter that he's talking about. So I think that he's coming at this, he's posted, it's a great post, but I think he's making an assumption that a lot of people know a lot of things that perhaps they don't. And so I'm going to go through and just break this down in simple terms, because I'm a simple guy. I'm just a simple little Moon Lambo, doing Moon Lambo stuff all up on the YouTubes. Okay, I'm a simple guy. I'm going to make it easy to understand. And so here is what Julian Biddle wrote. And by the way, just to be clear, he is the head of macro research at Global Macro Investor, working with Raoul Pal. Raoul Pal is the reason that I'm aware of the importance of liquidity and how it drives crypto, but also global markets. I mean, you can talk about the stock market, so on and so forth. And Raoul Pal, former Goldman Sachs executive, founder and CEO of Real Vision and global macro investor, and an XRP holder, by the way. And so they worked together and they came up with this thesis, the everything code. So anyway, here's what Julian Biddle had to say. And he posted this just the other day. He said, I wanted to give everyone something meaningful, a gift. This comes from global macro investor GMI and a deep, long-running body of research developed by Raoul Pal and myself. Many of you already know the everything code, which is our framework for understanding the macro landscape and why major central banks are debasing their currencies to manage aging demographics and overwhelming debt loads. I call this a gift because these 4 charts, while only scratching the surface of the everything code, give you the big picture context you actually need in moments like this. They stop you from getting lost in every Bitcoin pullback and explain why Raoul and I never panic, even when, to borrow one of his expressions, everyone's acting like monkeys throwing poo at each other. Once you understand the everything code, you stop trading short-term noise and expand your time horizon. You cannot unsee it. The starting point is what we call the magic formula. And by the way, I'll pause to note, when he says you can't unsee it, he really means that, and it is true. Just, I'm telling you, if you can hang through me with the rest of this video, you will not regret this. You will learn exactly why he's saying that, and he is correct. Anyway, post continues. GDP growth equals population growth plus productivity growth plus debt growth. Population growth and productivity growth have been falling for decades. Debt growth is the only thing filling the gap. The private sector has been deleveraging since 2008, mainly households, but debt levels are still around 120% of GDP. The public sector sits at roughly the same level. So here's the problem. If the government is running debt at 100% of GDP, and the private sector is sitting on another 100%, and for simple math, we call rates 2%, even though they are really closer to 4%, then the entire 2% trend growth of the economy is being consumed by servicing private sector debts. That is a completely unproductive use of GDP. And then there's the issue of public sector debts. There's just not enough organic growth to service the existing debt load. And let me pause to note, again, I'm just going to finish reading this post. You're probably going to have a bunch of questions. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I'm going to go back and I'm going to explain all the key portions of this, hopefully answering any questions that you might have. Anyways, post continues. To understand why this dynamic persists, you need demographics. Birth rates peaked in the late 1950s and have been declining ever since. This shows up about 16 years later in the labor force participation rate, as each generation enters the workforce, and that's chart 1, which is on your screen right now. And I'll slide to the other ones as they pop up in this post. It says that means the labor force participation rate is not going to rise anytime soon. It is set to keep drifting lower. This is a structural problem. Aging populations, falling birth rates, and rapidly expanding automation make the backdrop even more deflationary. AI and robotics are replacing humans at scale, and we are only at the beginning. This reinforces the need for ongoing stimulus to keep the system functioning. With weak population growth and sluggish productivity, the only way to keep GDP expanding is through debt. Now here's where it gets interesting. Government debt growth is completely offsetting the demographic decline, and policymakers know exactly what they are doing. Which brings us to chart 2 here. It's this one. And what happens next? All debt growth in excess of GDP gets monetized. That would be chart 3, which is this one. Basically, since 2008, magic money has effectively been paying the interest. Governments issue new debt to cover old interest, and once rates fall enough, central banks absorb it onto their balance sheets. So To wrap this up, demographics drive the decline in the labor force. Governments offset that decline with more debt. That debt eventually gets monetized through quantitative easing style operations, not always directly by the Fed, but through coordinated ecosystem of the Fed and Treasury and the banking system. And the bottom line is that there's still a massive wall of interest that needs to be monetized, far more than GDP can ever cover. Liquidity is literally the only game in town. And what thrives in a world of perpetual debasement? Bitcoin, which brings us to chart 4. That's this one. It says, I know this correction has been painful, but it's all part of the journey. These periods feel brutal in the moment. Then they fade and the trend resumes. This too shall pass. To quote Walter White from Breaking Bad, later echoed by Lynn Alden, nothing stops this train. And I gotta say, Breaking Bad, perhaps my all-time favorite show. I mean, if you could pick separate categories. I mean, maybe I could have like a favorite comedy or something like that. But I'm telling you, if you're just talking just something that is legit, and my God, Breaking Bad, number one. I'm sure a lot of you listening are nodding your heads out there, but just a fantastic show. Because it's one of those shows, it's like, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, and that's the way it was actually crafted. It's so rare. You know, so many stories, they'll just like stretch it out to you just for the sake of having more seasons, or they'll get canceled and you never get an end. This one, they could have dragged it out, but they just didn't. They actually respected the art. Anyway, so anyway, it writes, more cowbell, liquidity equals number go up over time. Zoom out and be more bullish. Now that is a freaking fantastic post. You gotta love that. Now, again, like I said, I'm assuming anyway that you guys have a whole bunch of questions. And so now that you've heard Julian's full post, let me break down the core idea here, because this is the part that most people don't intuitively understand. And if you don't understand this particular piece that I'm about to run through, then the everything code just sounds like a bunch of complicated charts and clever macro phrasing. But once you get this segment, it all clicks, and again, you can't unsee it. And so here's the key few lines here. Here, I'll highlight it on the screen right here. And again, this key section reads as follows. I'm going to break this down. Basically, since 2008, magic money has effectively been paying the interest. Governments issue new debt to cover old interest, and once rates fall enough, central banks absorb it onto their balance sheets. So to wrap this up, demographics drive the decline in the labor force. Governments offset that decline with more debt. That debt eventually gets monetized through quantitative easing style operations, not always directly by the Fed, but through the coordinated ecosystem of the Fed, the Treasury, and the banking system. And the bottom line is that there's still a massive wall of interest that needs to be monetized, far more than GDP can ever cover. So liquidity is literally the only game in town. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Okay, the United States, and honestly, every major developed country, let's just say they have a little bit of a math problem, okay? And it's not a cyclical recession problem. It's not some sort of political problem. It's not a spending problem. Nothing like that. It's a demographics problem, which is what he was talking about a little bit earlier in the video. But birth rates peaked decades ago. Labor force participation has been drifting lower for 20 freaking years. That means fewer workers, means slower GDP growth. It means fewer people paying taxes relative to the number of people collecting benefits. So that's, Social Security, Medicare, pensions, you name it. Like all the expensive parts, let's say, right? And because the population is not growing fast enough, and productivity is not growing fast enough either, the economy is not generating enough natural growth to pay for all of this. So what fills the gap? Drum roll, please. It's debt. It's debt. Debt fills the gap. And this is where Julian's magic money comment comes in, okay? The U.S. government doesn't pay its interest bill with tax revenue, okay? Why? Because there's not enough. So it does the only thing it can do. It issues new debt to pay the interest on the old debt. Okay? Just be clear, that's not a metaphor. This is literally how the system works. Okay? I mean, listen to this. When the treasury bill matures, the government issues a new treasury to pay you back, plus the interest that's accrued, right? That's how it works. Basic stuff, right? Because when someone buys a treasury bill or T-bill, they're basically loaning money to the United States government for a set period of time. That's what it means to purchase a treasury, to purchase a T-bill. And when that time ends, which is when the T-bill matures, the government has to pay that person back the money they loaned plus interest. At the end of that loan, you get the principal back and the interest, or plus interest, right? But instead of using tax revenue to pay it, the government just issues a new treasury bill. That's right. Instead of using tax revenue to pay for that, the government just issues a new treasury bill. And then they sell that to someone else and uses the money from that sale to pay off the old bill. So think about that. The government pays back old IOUs by creating new IOUs and selling them to new buyers. Okay, that right there, that's why so many people call the US debt system a Ponzi scheme. That is why right there. They're paying off old debt by creating new debt. And that's an aspect of an actual Ponzi scheme. That's why people are saying that the US debt system effectively is a Ponzi scheme. And I'm sympathetic to the argument, right? Now, in the world of finance, that's technically called rolling the debt. They don't call this a Ponzi scheme. They call it rolling the debt. So, if you ever hear that term, rolling the debt, that's what that means. And when the government owes over $1 trillion a year in interest, but GDP is only growing by half that amount, it's mathematically impossible to pay, from real economic activity. It's just impossible to do that. New debt has to be created. Now, here's where the system would completely collapse if not for the next step. The Federal Reserve ends up absorbing a large portion of this new debt issuance, okay? And literally by creating money out of thin air, and I do mean that. And before I go any deeper, there's one very important thing you need to understand, okay? The U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve are two completely separate entities. I mean, they're both part of the government, this is true. Congress created the Fed, a little over 100 years ago. But the Treasury will borrow money, they'll issue T-bills, pay interest, all that stuff. And the Fed is the central bank for the United States. They create reserves and control liquidity. They are separate entities, both inside of the government, though, okay? So, when a T-bill matures, the Treasury pays the holder back using money it raised by issuing new debt, which I covered, right? The Fed isn't involved in that part at all. That is separate. The Fed has nothing to do with that. What I described when I was talking about, paying off old debt with new debt, that's the Treasury. That is not the Fed. The Fed is not involved in that part at all. But the Fed comes in later during quantitative easing, aka money printing. But they come in, QE or other liquidity operations and start buying T-bills from big banks and financial institutions. And so, to be clear here, that means the Fed actually buys those T-bills and takes them onto its balance sheet. And when I say they're on the Fed's balance sheet, that just means the Fed owns them now, right? The Fed now owns the T-bills. And to pay for them, the Fed literally creates new money. I'm dead serious. The Fed... It's hilarious that this is really how this works. I know, it sounds ridiculous. Like, the average person has no freaking clue. And hang with me, because you'll see why this impacts you as an XRP holder, you in crypto. But I got to do this in order. That's why I was kind of warning you at the outset. This is kind of like a video where you really got to pay attention if you want to understand this. But I ain't kidding. To pay for the Fed, they literally create money out of thin air. New bank reserves. And the bank hands the Fed the T-bill. because that's who they're buying it from, the bank. So the Fed purchases the T-bill, and then the Fed hands the bank newly created cash. That's what injecting liquidity actually means. You ever hear that term? The government's injecting liquidity. What it means is they're creating money out of thin air. Again, the Fed is taking ownership of, for instance, a T-bill, and they're purchasing that from a bank, for example, and then they're to pay for that, they're literally creating new money. It didn't exist, and now it exists, and it's out there. Okay, now, that said, the debt, as it pertains to the T-bill, the debt still exists. The government still owes the principal and the interest and the interest on the T-bill. Okay? But now it owes that debt to the Fed instead of to a private investor. All right? And this transfer, from the private market to the central bank of the United States of America, is the mechanism that keeps the system functioning when debt loads are too large for the private sector to absorb on its own. And frankly, it's absolutely hilarious, because what I just described to you is the government paying the government. It literally is. It's just an absurd concept, but yes, it is reality. The government really is paying principal and interest to itself. I am not kidding you. That's absolutely what is happening right now. This is functionally what is happening. Almost no humans understand this, right? And so this is why Julian Biddle, says liquidity is the only game in town. Now you're getting an idea of what he means, right? Because this isn't something the government, chooses to do when the economy is weak. It's something the system requires in order to function at all. It has to do this because of the position that we're in. It doesn't have a choice. It has to do this. It has to print all of this money, or else everything literally falls apart. There is simply too much interest owed relative to the size of the economy. GDP cannot cover it. Taxes cannot cover it. The only way forward is through repeated liquidity waves. As I've just described, that's mechanically what's happening. This is the only way forward. There is no other solution. I mean, other than fiscal responsibility, but that's why I say there's no other solution, because they're not going to become fiscally responsible. Are you kidding me? You understand the cutbacks that would have to take place? It ain't happening. Both Republicans and Democrats, they're kicking that can down the road. That ain't happening. They're waiting. They're just rocking this bitch until the wheels fall off. Let's be real, okay? And so that is why XRP and crypto in general, they thrive in this environment. And so as bad as all that is, as hilariously ridiculous and sad as it is, XRP and crypto in general thrive in this environment. Crypto is a direct beneficiary of liquidity creation. So it's not magic, it's just basic math. When central banks expand liquidity, so print money, to absorb government debt, assets with a fixed supply, just like XRP, mechanically trend upward over time. And that is what not enough people understand. And that's why I'm making this video, because that is why all of this matters for XRP holders, okay? When a government constantly creates new debt to pay off old debt, the end result is permanent currency debasement and permanent liquidity expansion, money printing. And in a system like that, financial assets, especially scarce or utility-driven digital assets like XRP, especially XRP, they're structurally positioned to outperform cash. Literally structurally. It's mechanically, it's because of the way mechanically how everything works. That is why. And so most people get crushed because they sit in dollars while the system is engineered to make dollars lose value over time because they're printing them into oblivion. Asset holders are the ones who stay ahead. This is why it's so brilliant to hold scarce financial assets. XRP, folks. Money keeps chasing them, and there is always new money being created to chase them. That's why the dollar becomes worth less over time, and scarce assets like XRP become worth more over time, despite the years of volatility. And sometimes that does mean years of trading sideways. I'm telling you, the liquidity catches up to all of it. It really does. So this is why Julian and Raul say, zoom out and be more bullish. Not because they're ignoring volatility, and not because they think we're immune to corrections, but because structurally, the world is locked into a system where liquidity must keep rising. The demographics aren't changing. The debt isn't shrinking. And the interest burden is far too large for the real economy to absorb. And once you understand that, you understand why liquidity has to keep flowing and why XRP, and honestly the entire crypto asset class, follows it like a freaking shadow. That's the everything code in one sentence, okay? In a world where debt must grow faster than GDP, liquidity must grow even faster. And XRP is a direct play on that liquidity. This is the game, folks. And like I said earlier, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's why price crashes for crypto and XRP don't matter. They're effectively guaranteed to be temporary. That is that. And that is why it does not make sense to be fearful. And that's why I told you needed to listen to the end to understand all that, because I needed to mechanically go through this whole thing so you can understand with detail and with enough specificity, I think, you can now understand that this is the way the economy operates. This is fiscally what the United States does. It's ridiculously reckless. It's crazily irresponsible. And this is the state of things. And the average human, even living in the United States, has no freaking clue that's how this works. Not a freaking clue. Money will always have to be printed. And there's no sign that's going to be changing here. What happens as more dollars are created chasing assets that are scarce? Or in XRP's case, deflationary. You know? What do you think happens? And more people become aware of this and these assets are genuinely desirable, what the hell do you think happens? The everything code, my friends, the everything code. This is why I'm saying you don't have to stress out about it. Yeah, I understand. There's still going to be volatility. This doesn't go perfectly up in a straight line. Like I said, there can even be years of down and then sideways price action. That's actually historically normal in the 16 plus year history that we have of crypto so far. We already know that's normal. But the trend is the trend because of what I just said. This is just, these are facts. This is how this works. And if you just understand that, then it'll make it a lot easier to stomach the negative volatility because you understand, oh, it doesn't matter. Once you get this here, you can just sit back and be like, holy shit, it actually just doesn't matter. Because people are freaking out right now, and that'll cause, stop losses to get hit, and then, that cascades on down, and you'll get certain number of people panic selling this and that. There'll be some people taking profit, that'll be part of the mix too. And you can see that, and you can see prices fall dramatically, but you can still kick back and be like, doesn't matter. Because in the end, the government's just going to print more money. It's going to filter through the entire ecosystem, and a certain percentage of that is going to end up in risk on assets, meaning the stock market and crypto, and specifically XRP. That is how this works. So unless XRP has some sort of fundamental shift and it's no longer functionally useful, okay, that could be a problem long-term, duh. But if you're just talking about money flowing into the space on the whole, no, that's going to keep happening. And XRP is an obvious early winner of the crypto space. So I just don't know how you couldn't just have like complete chill if you just understand some of these things. And again, I know that the average person has no freaking clue what I just said in this video. And you have to actually pay attention and listen, as you did since you're here at the end of the video. But you have to do that if you want to understand it. I want this to be common knowledge. That's why I'm sharing it in this latest Moon Lambo hot jam. I want people to know this. And now you do. But it's uncommon knowledge, sadly. But this is how it works, and it sounds made up. The way I described it, it's true, but it sounds made up because it's that absurd. And that's why I say it's really bad for people who are cash heavy, and it's really great. This system, as bad as it is, and it shouldn't be like this, it is great for people that have risk on assets that are scarce. So when you're talking about financial assets, that's why crypto is so perfectly poised. That's why it does not make a damn bit of sense to be fearful here. It just doesn't. So you tell me what you think in the comments section below, but to me, it just could not be more clear. I wholeheartedly mean that. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.